right, hey y'all. I saw that at the same time Pikachu went live, Catch 'em All Collectibles, which not going to go for very long because I would hate to interfere with the stuff they've got going on. But pretty much the conversation and the topic for today is how much growth does the Pokemon hobby have left? And we hear this all the time, people talking about, well, you had this boom in 2016, you had this boom in 2020. But before that and around that, there's always been at least some amount of consistent growth, usually. Of course, there were times when the hobby was down, but on net, you're bringing more people into the hobbies, usually kids. And so I think a lot of people have this theory that, well, you had all these people that joined the hobby who liked it as kids during the pandemic, during 2016, and now they're putting money in, when in reality, it's possible that the number of kids playing Pokemon today is nowhere near the number that were playing back then. And what I mean is that right now, Pokemon is printing more cards than ever, 9 billion cards a year. And there were tons and tons of cards printed back in the 90s. But in the 90s, pretty much everyone using the cards and liking the cards and playing with them, almost everyone were kids. It was people on the playground. That's why we have so few that remain, because of the attrition. Lots of them have gotten ruined. By contrast, today, we know that a lot of the cards being bought, in fact, a lot of the money being pumped in, is put in by adults. And I just don't mean, of course, adults are buying cards for the kids back in the 90s, but adults nowadays are opening the packs and keeping them at a rate unseen. So even though the Pokemon hobby might be making just as much money, or printing even more cards than it ever has before, even during the boom years in the 1999, 2000, the reality is that the people who are spending this money, most of them are adults, and a lot of people are opening the cards are adults. And the ratio of kids buying this product versus before is far less. So if you're thinking that, oh, everyone that's buying Pokemon cards today is going to grow up in 20 years, have disposable income, and the hobby's going to boom again because they're going to spend money then, that doesn't recognize the fact that a lot of the people spending all this money today and making the hobby what it is are adults. And in 20 years, yeah, they'll have more disposable income than today, either because they're farther in career or their retirement or whatever, but it's not going to be because kids grew up. And so, of course, there's some number of kids today that are opening cards, and in 20 years, they'll have some nostalgia and want to buy it, or some number of kids that are opening with their parents right now who are spending a lot of money, and it'll, just like in the sports hobby, when they grow up, they'll be reminded of those cards and want to open them themselves. But in reality, I feel like one of the things that people are missing is that in 20 years, the people that are going to be adults moving into the hobby are very different than the adults that enter the hobby over the last 2 years, which is significant because it means that this sort of astronomical growth or exponential growth we had is not going to be the same. In 20 years, when the kids who got into Pokemon today, in a year ago, enter the hobby, it's not going to be exponential growth. It's going to be more logarithmic growth even, because it's going to be sort of balancing out of the people entering the hobby and picking up cards. Of course, it would be interesting to see the stats on the number of people right now buying cards or opening cards that are kids versus adults, but we do know that with the video games, Nintendo releases the data that half of people that buy Pokemon for Switch or whatever other system are adults. Back in the 90s, of course, it was probably near 100% were kids. So that also limits the growth. And so if we think that half the cards being opened today or half the fans today are adults in terms of the card games, then that definitely limits the growth 20 years from now. That doesn't mean there's no growth. Of course, that's extra people that in 20 years they'll spend money that don't have enough disposable income today as kids. But it does mean that the sort of exponential growth we saw both in 2016 and 2020 is far less likely. That being said, one of the big things that I feel like is underestimated is the number of people that still have old cards in their closets, and fans that never got back into the hobby, or people that used to be fans who have not yet sold their cards. And this happens all the time. I tell people I'm into Pokemon, and I just assume, because of everything I see on YouTube and some of my other friends, that they must be aware that the Pokemon hobby boomed. They must be aware that card prices soared and that people are getting back in the hobby. And a lot of the time, let's say most of the time, 80% of the time, people are just confused and they don't know, and they're just surprised that their card values ballooned. I was talking to one woman last week, and I said, oh, I'm super into Pokemon cards. My friend's like, yeah, he'll buy them from you if you're interested in selling. And she was just shocked, and she's like, well, I'm sure they're not worth anything. And she told me that when she was a kid, she would play with her parent, with her dad, because she was an only child, and he wanted to get his kind of nerd stuff out, and so them together would open cards and play cards and all that. So she must have a pretty big collection, I'm thinking. and she has not gotten it out. She hasn't sold any of it. She didn't even know the market was booming in 2020, 2021. And so I think that we genuinely underestimate a lot of the people that still have cards in their closets. And we frequently hear people say stuff like, oh, half of this type of old valuable card has been graded. But in reality, it's probably far less than that, or 15-20% of base set Charizards have been graded. And I'm not even sure. That set was printed so much, and I'm just talking to people that have not dug them out. And I think we genuinely even more underestimate not necessarily base set in that first generation, but really looking into the EX era in the early 2000s, because these are people that have come of age. I grew up with a lot of EX cards when I was 8, 9 years old, and I'm 25 now. But if you think about a lot of the people that were into base set, and I think actually dug out their collections, they were anywhere from 28 to 35 years old, or maybe older. And those are the people that really re-enter the hobby, and people that have good jobs, STEM jobs, and can afford to repurchase a lot of the cards or get back into the hobby. I think we underestimate the number of people that have EX era and early 2000s cards, or mid-2000s cards in their closet, because these are people, many of who might be anywhere from 18 to 22 to 25 years old, and are busy with college and other sorts of things, and may have not actually had time to get back into the hobby. I know a lot of people who got into the Pokemon card hobby and have been in it for a long time. Even they admit that during the college years they really got out of it because they were too busy, going to college. And so I think that's also one of the places where we underestimate. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds who have a lot of product from the mid-2000s, early 2000s era that has not surfaced yet, has not been graded, has not been sold. And I just see this every day. I mean, the number of people I have seen who didn't know there was a boom versus those that did, the number that don't know far outnumber. And I was in school. I graduated from law school in May. And in that last semester, I was, asking around to see if anyone had collections. And everyone I asked didn't know there was a boom. Not a single person knew. And so I acquired actually 3 or 4 collections from my fellow students who just had, old base set cards lying around. They sold them to me because they weren't really into it anymore. And I think that's thoroughly underestimated how many people have those sorts of cards laying around. Almost nobody I talked to is like, oh yeah, I dug out my collection and sold them because I knew they're worth a lot. There was one person I talked to who's like, oh, I was really into Pokemon, and so I kind of want to hold on to them. I feel bad about selling them. But very few are like, oh, it's a boom, so I have to get rid of my product and make the most money as I can. So I think we genuinely underestimate the amount of product that is still out there, combined with the fact that we underestimate the number of adults right now buying into the hobby. And I think there's something, and I would really like to see the stats, because we can't know for sure, because obviously the vast majority of product that is purchased by adults, either for themselves or for their kids. But I think we also underestimate the number of product that is enjoyed and opened by adults. I think when I was a kid, in my whole childhood, I think I maybe opened 60 or 70 Pokemon card packs. As a treat, we'd go to the store and my mom would give me a pack or two, or for my birthday I would get some packs for my friends. But really, I really like Pokemon cards, and even then I was probably open 60, 70 packs. In the last year, and I'm not even a huge card opener, I maybe open 2 boosters boxes per set for fun. I've opened more packs in the last year than I have for my entire childhood. And I think that's pretty significant. So if you're looking up today, the kids that are opening, for them it's a special treat like it used to be for us, and they're opening 2 packs per I don't know, grocery store trip or whatever it is. You'd be surprised that I would guess that today, out of all the product that is open, out of all the packs that are opened, I would guess that 80% is probably opened by adults who just buy way, way more than kids do, or parents will buy for their kids. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure some amount of it's also just like parents and kids enjoying it together. Maybe I'm wrong, but just from my own experience of the number of packs I bought as a kid and had access to versus the amount of disposable income and packs I have access to now is wildly, off base. So if you're thinking about it even that way, then yeah, maybe half of Pokemon fans are children, but probably 20%, but they're only responsible for maybe 20% of the product getting bought. And we'll see, in 20 years if these kids re-enter the hobby. But I think the sort of atmospheric or stratospheric and exponential growth is not going to happen again at the same scale we've seen. And I think steady growth as slight re-entry in the hobby is far more likely. So anyway, I'd be really curious to hear what you all think, how much growth the Pokemon hobby has left. Obviously, as the hobby matures, we're going to have more and more sets. And one thing we see in sports, of course, is that mid-era, sports cards have been around for decades and decades. And cards from 20 or 30 years ago, as opposed to 70 years ago, 60 years ago, are just like kind of forgotten. So it's going to be really interesting to see, 30 years out in the Pokemon hobby, when we have more sets, more Pokemon, more games, whether this really middle era, or actually really right before alt arts, because I think alt arts are gorgeous, but before that, whether they get forgotten. As we get new card types and new Pokemon, and just, it's neither new or old, it's just middle, and we'll see. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is the Pokemon hobby done growing? And if it grows more, how much growth does it have left? I'd love to hear what you think.